Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Brighton's Parish Church and our Tuesday evening nightlife interview here. We've not had an interview for a wee while, but really good to be able to share tonight in what could be quite a challenging, uncomfortable video, depending on where we go and what kind of comes up. So thank you for taking the time to tune in and to listen. Get a notepad ready, maybe to take some notes along the way even. And obviously you can play this back at the end if there's things you want to go over. Because there's probably going to be a lot of stuff in here, some things that you've maybe never thought about. And it'd be really good for as many of us as possible to be able to kind of take it in. And that's not just to be listened to, but to actually make a difference in our individual lives and the life of us as a congregation. I'm going to welcome our guest for tonight. Tonight I have Angela Sinclair with us. Angela is a member of our church family here at Brighton's. Angela.
Hello. Hi.
Good to have you with us. And tonight's interview was prompted because you got in touch with me, and it kind of led to a number of kind of conversations, bits and pieces of action, and I'm really looking forward, if that's the right way to phrase this, of raising an issue that's crucial to be raised, although I do understand it's going to be difficult for many people. So Angela, give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself.
Okay, so my name's Angela, as you said. I'm from Falkirk originally, lived up in Perth for 5 years, worked there too, but now back in Falkirk. I'm married to Mark, and I've got a son, or we have a son called Archie, and he's 8 months. So just living life as a mum, getting used to that, being on maternity leave, getting used to having a baby. My
Cool.
background's kind of youth work. I work when I'm at work for Rape Crisis Scotland. I work in one of their centres in Glasgow and support survivors of sexual violence, and also work in schools to help prevent sexual violence as well. So that involves working with young people, talking to them about issues in relation to sexual violence with an aim of preventing it.
Wow, that sounds incredible work, and sounds like a really challenging job as well. And congratulations on Archie being part of the family. So looking forward to baptizing him in July. So we'll look forward to that, and welcoming you and Mark as members to the church family as well on that day. So you've given us a wee bit of a background, and we've obviously been advertising this as we're going to talk about the issue of gender-based violence, and
Yes.
particularly violence against women. But that is going to raise some difficult topics, typical feelings, maybe even some difficult experiences for people. So just before we get into things, what would you want folks to know?
I think because of the nature of we're going to be talking about, as we say, sexual violence, abuse, they're not easy topics to listen to, first and foremost. And secondly, some people who are watching may have experienced some of the things we're talking about, and that because of that can cause feelings of hurt or distress. So really, when we are talking through some of this stuff, I'd say just look after yourself, and if you're feeling that you're maybe feeling a bit uneasy about what we're talking about, just switch off and come back to it later. Or you might want to talk to someone about what you're feeling, and at the end we'll put up support services as well, so if someone feels like they need to chat to someone in more detail, they can. So
Great.
just about looking after yourself.
Yep, definitely, Angela, and thanks for flagging that up at the start. So as I just said a few minutes ago, this has kind of come about because of conversations we had, and stuff that prompted you to get in touch. So why are we here talking about this tonight?
Yeah, good question. So I was watching one of your sermons online, obviously Zoom pandemic, it's all online. And you brought up in one of them about the fairly recent, really tragic case of Sarah Everard. And in that case sparked a lot of kind of national interest and protest in a way about the issue of violence against women, and it really brought to light for a lot of people the extent of violence against women. And in your sermon you were chatting about it and saying, the church needs to do more about these sorts of things. And obviously, given the line of work that I work in, I was like, I'm going to have to say something because I've got some knowledge in this, and see what maybe I can do to help, and stir up a bit of interest in the area to try and give some of my knowledge out.
I'm really glad that you did do that, Angela. I'm glad that you responded. You don't always get an awful lot of response from people at times, so I'm glad to know that you were, and that you took that step, because I'm sure that wasn't easy as well. Just thinking, oh, I'm going to get in touch with the minister here.
Well, I know when you're like, I know I've got this information, and it's so easy just to not bother doing these things, isn't it? You just forget about it. So I was
Definitely,
like, no,
definitely. Yeah, and that sermon was from the 21st of March. If there's anyone that's wanting to kind of go back and have a look at it, was actually during our Easter series, kind of preparing us towards Easter. So just we were looking there at one of the passages where Jesus predicts his death, and he's talking about welcoming little children and standing alongside those who are maybe ignored or overlooked, or who are vulnerable in society, and standing maybe with those that have less power, and not just focusing on our own interests and what really benefits ourselves. So that was some of the context, I guess, that led to that particular passage, and we were talking about we need to be a salty people in light of that as well. So I'm glad it managed to begin sparking and speak into a conversation. But I know that just from the conversations we've had, that gender-based violence against women, is a huge thing. So what is it? Help us get started on this, Angela.
I know. So basically, in its most basic form, it's it's a global human rights issue, and it's based around the fact that forms of violence such as domestic abuse and sexual violence are predominantly happening to women by men. And that's not to say that it doesn't happen to men, because it absolutely does. And it's not to say that women don't or can't perpetrate these types of violence. But domestic abuse and sexual violence, the statistics show that the majority of the time that when it's happening to women by men. So things like rape, sexual assault, and obviously I've said domestic abuse.
Yeah. And so that's mostly happening. Does it happen in particular groups more or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's like the group of women as a collective, but then what we find in terms of the research that's been done is that women from certain categories are experiencing higher levels of sexual violence and domestic abuse. So, for example, disabled women experience higher levels of disproportionate levels of sexual abuse. People from Black minority ethnic communities experience higher levels. And people who are transgender, for example, or from LGBT communities experience higher levels of violence. And I guess as we go on into this conversation, we'll just explore that and explore why that happens.
Sure.
But even if you look, like when we say things like domestic abuse and sexual abuse, it seems like they're quite severe things. But, in your sermon, you were talking about how all women have experienced this at some levels. Like, I think, did you say in the sermon, or did you post maybe about, lots of women are really scared to walk home at night? Like,
yeah,
the majority of women.
Yeah, it was in the sermon. I think I'd seen some stuff online. So, like there was a tweet that had been affirmed at that point more than 120,000 times, where women had said that they had faked a phone call or changed route or run in fear after feeling threatened by men in public spaces, or they've held keys in their hands, or they don't maybe wear headphones when they're out jogging, or they feel they have to stay to well-lit areas because of men and their influence upon women.
Yeah, and it's not. I don't like to blame men, and I guess we'll get into this as well, because it's a whole societal thing that's the problem. But we can get into that. But even as a female myself, like, you're told don't go walking at night. I remember going to my dog was a live puppy, going to take her a walk, and people tell me to be careful because it's late at night, like things like that. Like, women experience this, and I don't believe that men experience the same sort of, oh, you better be careful taking your dog out a walk at night, that sort of thing. And it's really interesting, living in Scotland as a female, because during the winter it gets dark at 5 o'clock. So
Yeah.
what do you know what I mean? Like, you're not allowed out the house after 5 o'clock. That's essentially, those comments are essentially saying. And
Mhm.
it's a basic human right to walk freely on the streets, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think prior to reading what we did in response to Sarah Everard, I probably had never considered those dynamics of life. Even though I'd probably heard Jill say herself that she had would walk home with keys in her hand. I hadn't recognized that, hadn't kind of soaked in what that actually meant.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And I don't even think a lot of females would. Well, I'm just speaking from personal perspective. You're just told, oh, you need to watch yourself. You don't really know why. But you maybe figure it out as you get a bit older that, the amount of young people that, there's statistics, I can't remember where they're from, but like there's a high percentage of young females experience things like catcalls as they're walking down the street. And people shouting things at them just because they're female, maybe shouting sexist comments. I'll need to get that stat, but and find out where it's from. But it's something like 75% of young girls experience this.
wow,
Mm-hmm.
that's really shocking.
Mm-hmm.
Really shocking. So I guess this kind of leads on, like, who is perpetrating this kind of violence and why?
Mm-hmm. Good question. So it is men, as I said, who mostly perpetrate this. Now, I always try and put myself in the shoes of a male when you hear these stats, because my prevention work in schools, when I go in and share this information with young people, young men and young women, and quite often I get a reaction like offensive, like as if like I'm a man hater, like I hate men. But I was just like, no, I'm just sharing the facts. Like, it's not all men commit these serious crimes.
Mm-hmm.
What happens is that we're all part of this culture that's created this place and space where this type of abuse can happen.
Sure.
And it goes back to things that we're taught in school about, like we're taught about gender roles, about males should be a certain way and that females should be this other way, like males should be strong, females should be caring, like boys like blue, girls like pink. It all stems from that. And like as we grow up, we're taught these different things about what men should be and what women should be.
Right.
And for some men, not all men, but for some men, that gives all men a certain level of power within society when they're told that they're powerful and strong and that women are a bit weaker. That creates this power imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
Most men don't abuse that power. They would respect the power that they have. But some men take advantage of that power, and that's when things like violence against women can happen, because no one will take advantage of someone who they feel less powerful than. So you have to have power to be able to violate someone, if you know what I mean.
And I guess, like, for most men, we don't even consciously register that we do have power. Like, probably for some of us men just now, we're like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't have much power. I'm just a normal guy. But I guess it's realizing that as it gets kind of spoken out and kind of called out, that's the reality. Sadly.
I know I think it's difficult to not feel, I don't know, as a male, it must feel that you're being accused of something, like, just because you're male. That's not your fault. Like, that's not our fault that, like, as individuals, it's not our fault that society's been shaped this way. But what we can do as individuals is actually take responsibility and recognise the power that we do have.
And I think that's been part of the thing about kind of Sarah Everard and how it made the headlines, that it was beginning to say that actually there has to be societal and cultural change. But with any societal and cultural change, it can't just be made by like the government kind of top down kind of approach. It has to be very much at a local, personal, individual level. And until we see things and recognize and accept things, then we're not going to change individually. And I think that again had been played a little bit into my thinking for the sermon on that particular occasion.
Mhm.
Because I guess there's also sadly various myths that go about women because of these dynamics.
Mhm.
Like, what are some of the ones that you kind of come across in your work?
Yeah, so it's a lot of obviously my field is sexual violence, so a lot of the myths that I hear in our society by working in schools and whatever else. It's a lot of to do with like blaming the victim. So quite often you'll hear things like women because like, oh, she shouldn't have been wearing that dress or she shouldn't have been wearing such high heels. What did she think was going to happen to her? So it's a lot of like the idea that women are asking to be abused, which is like a total ridiculous statement
Yeah.
when you think about it. There's a wee there's a wee stat. Where is it? So only 58% of people in Scotland believe that a woman who wears revealing clothing on a night out is not at all to blame for being raped. So that means that 42% of people think
Do.
to some extent that because of what someone is wearing, that they deserve to be raped. And basically, there's no excuse for sexual assault. It's what that's doing is saying to the abuser it's okay to then abuse someone then. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and like maybe, and you'd have to obviously see what they. If you explain that to people, I wonder whether they would then go, "Oh, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that."
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's that unconscious dynamic. So again, with the justice stuff that we did last October, November time around race, um, uh, we came across bits and pieces, which was about like unconscious bias.
Uh-huh.
And not being aware of things. And I wonder whether it was explained to people whether that 42% would go down
Uh-huh.
because people are like, I don't mean that, I don't mean that. But
Mm-hmm.
there's almost an element of we're just so unaware of the implications of it that we just kind of like go, oh, of course, like she partly to blame. But as you say, that's then saying actually it's okay for her to be
Mm-hmm.
raped
Mm-hmm.
because of what she's wearing. Like,
Accusing the rapist, yeah. Mm-hmm. And you know, like I think, oh, we're going to say we're all guilty of it, but I don't want to like. I'm really reluctant to place individual blame because blah blah blah. I've said that before. It's a societal thing. But you know, even for me growing up, you know, just with the influences that I'd had in my life before I became educated. This is why education's key. You know, I would maybe have thought some of these things as well. Like this is about a collective thing. It's not about, you know, one person saying, oh, you're doing wrong. It's about thinking, how can we all be educated in this? And this
yeah,
is part
yeah,
of it, isn't it?
yeah,
Even things like, you know, if a woman decides to drink alcohol, or like someone might say, there's kind of common myths that, well, she was really drunk, she should have took more care of herself. You know, and that brings in kind of issues as well, because, you know, if someone wants to drink alcohol, that's their choice. Um, and they don't deserve to be raped or sexually abused. It's like saying, you know, if someone was really drunk, a male or a female, and they got their wallet stolen, like, and then someone said, oh, you were a bit drunk, someone shouldn't have stolen your wallet, that would be ludicrous to say. But then people will accuse survivors of sexual violence and give them the blame if they were too drunk. They shouldn't have got themselves into that
yeah.
situation. Yeah.
It's when you
So
put it in those kind of terms, it starts jarring of just saying, this is ridiculous. That as a society, we think that argument makes some sense
mhm,
before we hear this.
mhm.
So you were saying, oh, go
Sorry.
for it.
I was just thinking there was, oh, you know, like the drunk thing, because, you know, within the Bible, that's seen as a sin. That can, I don't know, if like some of like the Christian attitudes can contribute to that. Does that make sense? It's just coming to my head there.
Sure, sure.
Um, because like people shouldn't do this. Like that's not illegal. Do you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah, yeah,
moral stance, isn't it?
yeah. And we maybe also I guess there's that kind of moral aspect. Oh, they were doing wrong, so they were going to get kind of wrong back to them or something.
Uh-huh.
Because like Christians believe in karma, not
Yeah.
we're not supposed to, like, that's not how God's created the world. But yeah, we often think in that kind of way, sadly.
Mhm.
So you obviously, we've kind of started to kind of talk about kind of the church kind of context and bits and pieces, and we'll be talking a wee bit about what the church can do. But you were saying that you work for Rape Crisis Scotland. You're educating folks. You're working alongside professionals, whether through Rape Crisis Scotland or in other spheres.
Mhm.
Um, what is the perspective of other folks, especially maybe non-Christians,
Mhm.
about the church in response to gender-based violence?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's quite a difficult question to answer because, I don't think a lot of people are aware of things that the Church of Scotland does. And I think from what I hear and see and perceive from different people, I think when they think of the church doing work, like work to help people, they maybe think of, things overseas. Um, and I think it's not really well known about the church being involved in helping to prevent gender-based violence. Like I wasn't even really aware of Integrity, which is a Church of Scotland resource. They're working on a resource to help prevent violence against women. And I think so. There's part of like the publicity side of things that people aren't really aware of. But I think
Mm.
as well, the views, if we're talking about views from non-Christians, I think people have very uneducated views on the church. I mean, they just see what they see in the news. For
Hmm.
example, and I don't think what we see in the news can be very positive. I mean, we see like sexual abuse and like, people in power in churches abusing people.
Yep.
And that can often skew people's view on the church.
Mm.
Um,
So they wouldn't be thinking. So survivors of abuse wouldn't be thinking that the church is a place to go, and probably workers working in the kind of this field wouldn't be thinking that the church is someone they would likely partner with. Is that what you're saying?
I guess so. I mean, but that's just my experience from my perspective. And,
Mm.
I think the very traditional, I think the perspective that people have the church, not just the Church of Scotland, just the church as a whole,
Yeah, yeah,
is that it's very traditional and outdated and actually promotes a patriarchy in a
sure.
way as well, which
Yeah.
is difficult to hear, obviously being a Christian myself as well. That's really challenging.
Hmm.
It's challenging things. And in a way, I think people have this perspective that the church promotes gender inequality. It could be said as well. I think people have this idea that, again, of very traditional views of that people interpret scripture like that men are dominant over women, that women have to be submissive and weak. And I think this kind of uneducated view of people
Mm.
in the world can be quite harmful because then they hold on to these views
Yep.
and they
Yep.
think, well, is the church actually helping or is it actually causing more harm?
Sure.
And
And I,
that's really difficult.
yeah, yeah, and I think like a lot of us would probably like, how could people think that of the church, or
No.
how could they think that of us Christians, like with the clear teaching in the Bible that like, God values all people, and there is no preference between men and women, that we're created equal in the sight of God,
Mhm.
and as we heard Jesus, like that we're called to stand alongside those that are experiencing uh, abuse, ill treatment in all its forms, not just gender-based violence.
Mhm.
So, like, I guess there's part of us like, how could people think this? But as you say, the media perspectives, experiences, and I guess it's this doesn't seem to be something that I don't remember anyone ever having talked with me about this. It
Mhm.
wasn't part of my school education.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think, because well, it's 20 years since I left school, so
Mhm.
probably we weren't really talking about it 20
Mhm.
years ago. Um, so we
Mhm.
weren't talking about it in the church either.
Mhm. So like sexual abuse and things and domestic abuse, is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I don't remember talking about that in school. I don't remember talking about it in church for sure.
And as
Um,
like, churches have been like churches do so much good work in so many different areas and deep Christians care deeply about these sorts of things, but there's something missing. Like there's the link that's missing that people aren't becoming aware. I don't know if it like people aren't knowledgeable about everything the church is doing. and does and wants to do, and how much the church cares about these issues. Because I'm sure people watching, if anyone is, people watching this right now care. They're watching because they care about these issues. But maybe the church needs to just speak louder about what they're doing, which kind of goes against the kind of idea of being humble about what you do, you know.
Sure.
There's a wee conflict there. I wonder if that's part of the problem, is that we're kind of like told to like go and do good, but don't shout about it for your own self-praise.
Sure.
But at the same time, we need to let people know that the church is a good place, and it's a safe place, and it's a caring place, and it's a place of love ultimately.
Yeah, but I guess also there's the perspective that actions speak louder than words. So it's like, well, there are, as we're going to talk about just in a moment, our next question is about what is the Church of Scotland in particular doing, but at a local level, like I'm not really sure what Brighton's is doing. I think we have posters up in the toilets, but I think that might be about it. And when was the last time I actually noticed that poster or read that poster? I probably read it the first time, and just now it's just part of the furniture.
Yeah, and that's what it becomes, doesn't it? Because there's so many other things going on.
So what is the Church of Scotland doing? I know that you've been doing some digging into this after our initial conversation. So help us understand more about our own denomination as well.
It's quite simple, really, actually, now I think about it. So I didn't really have a clue, but I had an idea that Church of Scotland might have been doing something. And so it turns out they do. So it's called Integrity. And basically, from what I gather, I had a meeting with Morella and Kay, who they would be able to fill you in a lot better than me. But from what I can gather is that they're working to help churches help prevent violence against women and girls. So they're developing a tool, a resource, in that they're piloting in 4 different Church of Scotlands. And they're going to hopefully be rolling it out. So I think that's going to be like education and training for churches to help prevent violence against women. So that's really good. I was really happy to hear that all this work's going on that I wasn't aware about before. And they have, on the website, they have, like, you can have a look, they have a couple of resources. One is a quiz for churches, and actually it's like an ABCD quiz, and it's designed to help churches have a look at themselves and think, how can we help prevent this type of violence? And also they have a violence against women charter, which gives ideas and kind of ways in which the church can help prevent sexual violence, but also support people who've experienced this abuse.
Brilliant. Well, what I'll make sure is in the description, I'll make sure we put a link to the relevant pages so that people can access those and go and have a look at the charter and also look at the ABC quiz and bits and pieces, just so we make sure that we can follow up on that. But I guess the question then is, if that's some of what's kind of happening at a national level, and obviously they're piloting the training, and hopefully in time that would be more widely available. What about Brighton's, Angela? Like, what could we do? What would be a next step for Brighton's?
Good question. I think the first step is, like, caring about it. I'm sure people care about this issue, but then you're like, what can we do? And I think that's a problem, because I think even me and you are a bit like, well, what can we do? But I think it's about being open to learning and understanding, and looking at your own individual practices, like our own behaviours. Do we have sexist views? That's challenging to ask yourself. Do you have sexist views? Where did we learn them from? I learned my views growing up from loads of different places. So schools, families, friends, social media influences as a lot. And then, what can we do to change them? So first of all, looking at individual, at yourself. And then I suppose, look at the church as a whole, like Brighton's Parish Church. Do we as a church actively promote gender equality? Like, think about that. Like, Do we need to change anything? Are there systems in place that promote inequality? I don't know. Because I've not been a member for very long, I don't really know a lot of what's going on in Brighton's Parish Church. Is there things that we could change in groups or as individuals as well?
Mm, mm. And I guess for me, when I've been thinking about it in preparation for tonight, I think, like I've probably sadly with most things in church life, unless some folks step forward, it can, even if we look at things individually, there's an element of saying, well, we kind of need that kind of someone to kind of take that initiative, I guess. Just otherwise, it would appear that, like with anything in church life, if things don't happen. So I know churches that don't have teams that maybe look after pastoral care or discipleship. So then those things don't happen. There's no proactivity about it. And I feels for me, whilst there does need to be an individual element, I think for us collectively to move forward and look at some of these kind of wider dynamics, it might be helpful to see if there's anyone that wants to get involved in this particular piece of work. Would that be helpful, do you think, or is that me passing the bat too much?
No, I think so. Yeah, we can obviously be involved too. I think so, absolutely. I mean, having a group of people who are passionate about this, working to help with the cause, would be really good. And things like educating each other and like chatting together about what could be done would be really helpful. And we'd actually say, as Brighton's Parish Church, we are taking this issue seriously. We don't quite know what that's going to look like yet, but as we chat and discuss and explore, that might become clearer.
Yeah. And it sounds like you'd be quite happy to be part of that group then as well.
Oh yeah, must be. Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be part of that.
Okay.
Everyone wants to join me because I can't do it on my own. So
Yeah, I know, and you shouldn't rest on one person's shoulders, and it shouldn't just be women as well. There should be men involved there too, and I would imagine that I would be an active part of that group too, because I know from the charter, for example, that there needs to be teaching, and I'm the teaching elder, so I'm going to have to play a part. So for sure, but I think it would be good to have a mixed gender group on that and things. So that sounds like a really important next step beyond people kind of looking at the links in the description and watching this video. Is also saying, well, I want to be involved in something like that. I want to help kind of shape this community and help us reflect better the scriptures better and mature as God people in this way, so that we are known and become known as a place of greater equality for women. So okay, I guess we're just about time for rounding up. Any kind of final bits and pieces you'd want to share, Angela?
Well, not really, but I suppose it is a massive issue. And what have we had? I don't know how long we've been on this for, maybe half an hour or so. And we've covered loads of stuff, but there's so much more to uncover, and there's so much more education and training that we could go on and on about. But if anyone's wanting to find out more, then I'd be happy to share any more information as well on it. And I suppose if remember at the start we talked about the trigger warning. About people do feel that a lot of the stuff we've talked about is uncomfortable, can affect people, then just make sure that you do get support, and we'll just add the support services into the link as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. So what kind of agencies are you thinking of that people could maybe reach out to? Or
So there's Rape Crisis Scotland, obviously, I know that. They support people who've experienced sexual violence. They've got a national helpline, and there's they have email, and you can find them on social media as well. Women's Aid are a great organisation to help people who've experienced domestic abuse. And if there's any young people watching, obviously Childline's a really good one, and Crossreach as well, which is the Church of Scotland support.
Great. Okay, well, we'll make sure we get those all in the description as well, so that people can access those. Angela, thank you for your time tonight, helping us as a church family just dip our kind of toe in the water with this. Really, as you say, there's more to do, more to learn. But thank you for your time, your honesty, vulnerability, and your willingness to kind of help move this along that little bit more.
And you, thanks for having me.
Well, everybody, it's that's the end of our time together tonight. I thank you for tuning in, giving the time to this. As we said, it's probably been uncomfortable at points, but I think we can all see that it's a really crucial issue for us to get involved in and become known as people who care about this in an active sense. And so if you've resonated in some way with what Angela said and want to get involved, particularly with that group that might work on gender-based violence and inequality issues, then please get in touch. Email info@brightonschurch.org.uk, and we'll make sure that we collect those and then look to kind of take things forward. And as we said, if you have experienced gender-based violence and you're needing support, then there's those agencies in the description. You can, of course, reach out to myself as well. And if you want to pass anything on to Angela, again, maybe just email info@brightonschurch.org.uk and we can send that on to Angela directly, and then you can liaise with her too if you just wanted to say thanks or whatever it be. So thank you for your time tonight. Thank you to Angela. And as we go from here, may we truly be a salty people, that we would be more Jesus-like in how we respond to the issues in society, that we might embody him to one and all. And so go from here with the blessing of God Almighty, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.